Ladies and gentlemen, a huge welcome back to everybody to your professional diploma in digital marketing and SEO. In our second lesson, which is where we are now, we are going to be understanding how to set up marketing goals that are meaningful and measurable. In today's lesson, we'll be learning how to identify the objectives of our business, align our digital marketing goals with our objectives, and then obviously we'll learn how to measure our success through KPIs, or key performance indicators. Before any type of action in the digital sphere can start, we need to make sure that we identify our business objectives. First of all, what are business objectives? It's very easy to just try, guess, hope, predict, and assume that we know the outline of what an objective is. But if we don't really define it, then understanding the concepts of why we're doing what we're doing might seem quite tedious or meaningless. It's very important to understand what our business objectives are. So essentially, they're our goals set by business when promoting itself to potential customers, which should be achieved within a given time frame. And that time frame is vitally important. So basically, they show us what we want to achieve within our business. There are tons of objectives that we could set for our business, and it will depend on our specific business's individual needs. But let's go through some common ones that stand out to us the most right away. First up, we have awareness. And in this case, your goal would be to have people aware of your business and your products or services, whatever it is that you may offer. Secondly, we have branding. This is quite similar to awareness, so it's very easy to get confused here, but what it essentially means is building up your own distinct brand. That is really what will truly separate you as unique over and above the rest. Creating something that is unique, if you may, is very, very important in the marketing sphere, because marketing is essentially how you strategize your competitive nature within your industry or sector. So this doesn't refer to the actual people who know about you, but rather who you really want to be as a business itself. You want people to associate your brand when they think or see of similar products or services, and that's where the competitive nature comes in. What you really want is for people to know about your brand logo instantly. This is a goal achieved over a long period of time and can't always be measured with metrics unless you have access to some expensive tools. And even then, it's maybe not even foolproof. Then another goal could be engagement. Again, going away from the goal that you simply want your business to exist, the goal is all about for people to actually interact with your business. That interaction is absolutely crucial, and we spoke about the different forms of interaction as communication in the previous lesson. You want people to interact with your business, as this increases the chances of them actually using your product or service. Then another goal that you could set yourself up with would be the thought leadership. And thought leadership is a very important concept to consider in every aspect of marketing in general. Please write that down. This means positioning yourself as someone that others look up to for expertise. Now, you could think of this in many different ways, shapes, and forms. I mean, we look at certain actors, we look at certain business leaders, keynotes, speakers. We look at all of them for a specific reason because they stand out for their expertise, and that's what really makes them famous and well sought after in the industry. Now, think about the specific nature to what makes them better than the rest. That is thought leadership. Think about the people you follow on social media or the blogs that you read. That all comes into play too. You follow them because you're interested in them, right? That's basically how we want to be seen as well. That interest that we generate, that interest that we spark, needs to be manifested and worked on, because that is essentially the thought leadership strategy. Then, of course, we have sales as a business goal. So essentially just focusing on increasing your sales. And at the end of the day, this is the final goal of every business. It's a no-brainer. It is what all other goals essentially feed into. And then, last but not least, we have retention. So you would actually like your customers to actually stick with you, right? You don't want them just to buy the cheapest product in your service offering or product offering and then disappear. You want them to really take advantage of everything that you have to offer, especially if you have some sort of annuity service that they could benefit from and you could get financially rewarded from too. One thing I will say though is that you should try work with the SMART principle. That's the SMART principle. And we want to focus on the SMART principle because when we're coming up with our goals, we need to be very specific in every nature of what we determine our goals to actually be, and how we're going to approach our goals in order to make sure that we tackle them efficiently and obviously effectively. Essentially, we want our goals to be SMART, and where the S comes into play is the goals being specific. It's very important that our goals are specific and not too general, such as I want to grow. Anyone can say they want to grow, but that is very vague and it doesn't really have a specific nature to it. What you want to grow into becoming, how do you want to grow, when do you want to grow by, this is very important. Then your goals need to be measurable, and that's where the M in the SMART method comes into play. How exactly we measure our goal is something we look into as well, but think back to the metrics we learned about in lesson 1. These come into play too over here. Then our goals need to be achievable, and that's the A of the SMART method. So this is something that I have the capacity to do, right? It has to be something I have the capacity to do because it needs to be achievable in my own personal life. It needs to be achievable in my own daily routine and what I have the capacity to actually take on. Then your goals need to be realistic too, and that's where the R comes into play. For example, is it realistic to see an increase in lead generation of 500% from one week to another? Probably not. And then your goals need to also be timely. So you need to set a deadline for yourself and when you want to achieve these goals by. It's vitally important that not only are our goals measurable, but we have a specific time frame that we achieve these goals by. And these specific goals, should I say, these realistic specific goals. We want to be able to make everything measurable so that we know how far from or close to achieving these goals we are. So let's put this into a bit more perspective. Let's imagine, for example, we have this company called Custom Comfort. They're located in Manhattan, New York, and they're a family-owned furniture manufacturer specializing in custom, made-to-order sofas. They pride themselves on high quality, and they have a showroom in Manhattan, but deliver throughout the US too. If we look at them, their business goal could be, for example, branding, right? They would like to establish themselves as a high-quality supplier of sofas, essentially. That's their main business. Then the next goal would be sales, but that would simply be selling more sofas. That could be elaborated on in a much more detail because they could have a physical store or an online store. We'll talk a bit more about this as we progress through the course, but just understanding that could be elaborated on a lot more in detail. And then we obviously have awareness. So Custom Comfort is something that they would like to be more well known for and also strive to draw more attention to, because the moment there's more attention on comfort and custom comfort, more importantly, then they are the company that people look more towards. So creating the awareness around these topics could be a very important business goal for them. You might have picked up on the fact that these goals are not quite SMART yet, but just bear with me, everything will come together towards the end of this lesson. So for now, we have our business goals for Custom Comfort. The next step is to come up with a marketing goals based on these business goals. So what does that actually mean though? Well, essentially, our digital marketing goals and our business goals can vary quite a bit. The business goals encompass where you want to take your business, including everything. Not all of this will be restricted to the digital marketing space. However, we need to decide on which part of the business goals or objectives we want to focus on with our digital marketing efforts. So essentially, when it comes down to digital marketing specifically, there's quite a bit of a crossover between the overall business objectives and your digital marketing goals, as you can see. We'd be a bit more specific to the digital world here, but just understand that this concept really applies across the board. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory and quite similar to the business objectives we want though, such as sales, awareness, engagement, retention, and thought leadership. But a couple of them I will certainly elaborate on a bit more further throughout the duration of this program. So first of all, we have lead generation. This refers to potential customers showing their interest in your business. They would typically fill out a form with their contact details to request more information about a product or service. Let's say, for example, that you're on a website for a wedding planner, right? You're trying to search for someone who's going to be able to help you out for your big day. You want to know more information about the wedding planner, And you might want to get an idea of a quote too, so that you can piece together some pricing and see if it's actually achievable for you to use their services. So what you do is that you fill out a contact form with a little bit of information about yourself and your plans for your wedding. That is then submitted as a lead, which you communicate with the wedding planner to show your intentions that you're interested in using their services. It's not a 100% commitment. It just shows intent to use their services. However, you require information to obviously filter through before you make that decision. The information that you gather from the wedding planner is vitally important to obviously see if they're going to be suitable for you, but also to see if it's going to be realistically affordable. Very, very, very important, these lead generation contact points. And this can certainly be one of our goals that we can set up right away. Then we have word of mouth. Yes, you heard and read that correctly. Word of mouth. A fairly new term, that is, which is similar to awareness, when that is more specific to the digital equivalent of the word of mouth concept. So rather than people talking about your brand face to face, the aim here is to get them to talk about you online. If we can get them talking positively about us online, then we'll certainly set ourselves up for success. We want them to share our posts, etc., and obviously get them talking about our posts. That's where the main focus should be right away, is to share the content that we are creating, because naturally they will talk about it. The reason it is called word of mouth is because, well, on the computer, we do everything with our computer mouse. So word of mouth is very important. This could be through shares, them mentioning in your posts, as well as reviews, etc. Certainly types of concepts that we can work on and strategies that we can work on right away. Then we have SEO, which, as you know from our last lesson, is all about appearing higher on the search engine results pages. On the right-hand side, for example, I googled red dress. We want to appear in those first 2 or 3 search results because people often do not scroll past them. Then we have website traffic, which refers to more users visiting your site. Unlike organic traffic objective, increasing website traffic could mean using paid organic traffic. Again, this is not exclusive, but these are some very common marketing goals that you could have. And you would need to think about your own business and your individual objectives to determine which one of these goals can be applied to you more specifically. Let's go back to our custom comfort example and align these to the business goals that we determined. So for our branding, we would again have branding as a marketing goal, and then engagement. And yes, it's possible to have more than one marketing goal, and essentially you need to have more than one marketing goal. But your overall business objectives need to just be defined a bit more specifically, which is why we have the approach that we do here. And for the engagement, we basically want people to interact with our business and our brand. So liking posts, commenting on them, reading them, and all that in the very first place. That's the first primary objective that we want to achieve. Then reading our emails and so on. The list gets longer and longer and longer, as I'm sure you understand. For sales, our goals would be both sales and lead generation. For the latter, we basically want people to request more information and ask for quotes, for example, because the moment they do that, they submit their contact information, and we don't lose contact with them after just sending them the information. By having and receiving their contact information, we can actually follow up on the information provided and actually create some sort of urgency for them to interact with our business in a bit more detail and obviously take up a product or service that we have to offer. And then finally, we have our business goals of awareness, and the marketing goal could then be awareness itself. Now that we have our goal set, we will then have a look at what we need to know in order to find out whether we have achieved those goals, right? This is the information that we need to obviously put together in order to understand if our goals are achievable. And what we have from the information gathered is certainly more than enough to understand that from the get-go. In the coming lessons, we'll have a look at exploring how exactly we measure the success and where we would like to go with achieving these goals. So obviously what kind of channels we would need to use as well in order to accomplish that. It's a lot more, there is a lot more that we can look forward to, and we'll unpack this in a bit more detail as we progress through each lesson in this program. Up next, we're going to get into the success through KPIs. And remember, that is your key performance indicator. If you haven't written that down already, take this opportunity to do just that. So KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. And KPIs is a measurable value that allows a business to understand how achieving their objectives is a possibility. All right, it helps define and unpack that very concept. I know this might sound a bit abstract right now, but let's look at specific KPIs and you'll understand exactly what they are and how they work. So, starting with general marketing KPIs, we have our customer lifetime value, which we got to know a bit more about in the last lesson. Oh, and just for your own information, this is also referred to as the LTV, so lifetime value, or LCV, lifetime customer value. Just as a refresher, no matter what you really call it, the customer lifetime value shows how much one customer is worth to a business throughout the duration of their time or their interaction with a business. Then the CPL we already know. So the amount we spend per lead, right? The cost per lead. It's a very important concept to understand. Just to give you an example of this though, say you create an ad on Facebook for people to fill in a lead form, for example. So you want to get their contact information. Let's say, for example, you spend $50 on the ad and 200 people fill out the form. You'll get a CPL of about $4. So you divide the number of leads generated by the cost that you spent on actually generating that lead itself. Then we have return on investment, or ROI, or in this case ROAS for short, right? The return on investment. So how much of the return that we make from our investments, and the return on ad spend, which is what ROAS more specifically stands for. You know, there's a very big difference between general return on investment and return on ad spend. The biggest difference between the two is the industry specific approach that we take, okay? And the industry specific approach in marketing needs to be more focused on the ROAS nature, return on ad spend. We want to know if we're getting a more specific return on our capital spent on the ads that are being generated. Is the attraction where it needs to be, and are we targeting the right market the right way? Right? We don't just want to be making money with with some sort of return on investment. We want to be making money in line with our business goals, and that is with more specifically focused ad revenue. All right, it's very important for us to do that. When it comes to new KPIs, new metric number one is the cost per acquisition, or CPA for short, as this shows us how much it costs to get someone to use our service or buy a product or register on our platform. At least that is what it usually means. Just be careful, depending on the platform, an acquisition could mean something else though. So for example, on Google Analytics, an acquisition actually refers to a website visit. So whenever you have a look at metrics on different platforms, please don't double check, or do make sure that you check it means the same thing. All right, you need to make sure that the understanding of acquisition on these sites is well understood before you commit to using their ad generation service or their metric system. Right, then we have our conversion rate. This measures the percentage of people who have usually seen our content or ad in comparison to the ones who have completed a conversion. Whatever that conversion may be, remember, this can be a sale, okay? It can be a sale, but it could also be a lead, a sign up to a newsletter, as well as many other different things, which we will obviously elaborate on. So to calculate your conversion rate, all you have to do is take the number of impressions you're getting and then divide that number by the actual conversions themselves. And then we have the media mentions. So essentially the amount of times that we are mentioned by others in the media. Usually we would use this kind of KPI for goals such as engagement, branding, or awareness. These are the ones that are a little bit harder to measure, but certainly key pillars in the understanding of how we measure our performance within the media. For SEO, we have a ton of other metrics, but for now, I won't overwhelm you. We are only at the second lesson. And instead, I'll just show you the most basic ones, such as traffic volume. So essentially, the amount of visitors to our actual platform itself. Very important to understand. Then we obviously have the rankings. So essentially where our pages actually appear in the search results. This is something we'll go into in a lot of detail throughout the course, as it's a huge subject in itself. And then we have the bounce rate. So essentially that is the percentage of people who visit our website and then immediately leave the site again without taking any action. This is something we want to avoid, which is also why we'll focus on understanding understanding this concept in a bit more detail as we progress. Vitally important to understand how to retain the clients that are visiting the website that you've created. If you spent enough time putting the website together and obviously generating that lead, you want to retain them the moment they land. So understanding exactly how we do that will be focused on as we progress. In terms of social media metrics, we have the number of likes, comments, or shares, which is very important to keep our finger on the pulse of. And then we have impressions, a metric we already know, so essentially how many times your ad or post has appeared on the screen. And then we have reach, which refers to the number of people who we have seen our post. Right? Remember the big difference between impressions and reach. You should have taken that down in your notes in a previous lesson. But if you would like a more detailed understanding of the difference there, you're more than welcome to go back to the first lesson. And then we have follower growth rate. Also a very important metric to keep our finger on the pulse of. This doesn't mean the number of followers essentially, but rather refers to the increase or decrease of followers. And this number is represented as a percentage. And then for paid search, again, something we'll cover in a lot more detail as we progress, we have CPC, so the cost per click. That is something we want to monitor, how much each click on an ad is actually costing us. And then CTR, the click-through rate, which measures the number of impressions to the number of clicks on an ad. And other main KPIs in paid search are CPA and CPL. So as we know, we don't randomly choose our KPIs. We want to choose the ones that are most relevant to us. So in order to pick the right KPIs for you and your business, you need to keep your mind as well as your business goals and then your digital marketing goals all aligned. Right? Ask yourself the following question. What does good performance look like? Very important question, that indeed. Ideally, you should have that figured out already, right? But if you don't, you need to work on it right away and actually sit down with yourself and create some sort of business idea or plan and obviously strategic approach to getting that accomplished. If you achieve your goal, how do you know that you've achieved it? I mean, you can't just sit there and say, I feel like I've achieved it, right? You can't guess, hope, predict, or assume anything with regards to metrics. You must know with certainty that you have achieved it. And the only way that you can do it is aligning your achievements or your progress with the metrics. This will then tell you what kind of information you're looking for so you can determine your KPIs. Let's get back to our case study to make this a bit more clearer to understand. So for our first goal of branding, our KPIs would be the engagement rate, right? This basically compares the number of impressions to the number of engagements that we're getting. We could have a look at our newsletter signups, as more signups would mean that more people are interested in hearing back from us. And then we could also track our media mentions to see what is actually being said about us by others. Then for engagement, we would measure the engagement rate. The bounce rate, as bounce rate is an indication that users are not engaging with our content. Then click-through rate to indicate how compelling our content actually is. And then obviously the media mentions. Moving on to the next goal, as we have sales and lead generation. In this case, we would definitely keep track of our conversion rate and our lead generation rate. Then, of course, we would keep track of our ROI as well as ROAS. And I mentioned the key differences that separate those two in the previous couple of slides. And obviously then our CPA rate as well. So these are all pretty much performance focused, which is vitally important in the entire KPI structure. And then finally, we have awareness. It can be a bit of a tricky one to measure, as it's hard to quantify how aware people are of our brand. But what we can measure, we obviously will. And that is our follower growth rate. Again, our media mentions, the traffic we're getting to our website, and of course, our rankings. We would assume that with higher rankings, more people will see our website. Then we would measure our impressions and our reach too. We can take this further with the influencers and affiliates that we can work with, but let's stay simple for now, just for the understanding of the concepts themselves. So this essentially is what we would be doing when considering all the metrics. We'd start off by deciding on our business objectives, then align our digital marketing goals with them, and then try find a way to measure these goals by choosing our key performance indicators. Please remember though, these are just the starter KPIs that we can look at for now. This is just to get the ball and our understanding rolling. You can get a lot more information with the use of specialized software or different tools that the metric systems offer that I'll also introduce to you as we focus on maturing through this program. For example, some channels measure brand lift, and that is brand lift. Please write that down in your notes so you can remember the concept when we get onto it at a later stage, which is just simply the percentage of people who would recognize your brand again after having seen it before, which is a pretty cool concept if you have to think about it. So while this list is definitely not exhaustive, it does, however, show you the genetics of how your business goals, marketing goals, and KPIs all relate to one another. Now, if you remember at the start of this lesson, we said we need to make sure all of our goals, no matter how big or small, are SMART. Can anyone remember what SMART actually stands for, the SMART process? Well, again, just to remind you, that is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Vitally important that you remember that, because it's something that we're going to apply to every aspect of our understanding when it comes to looking at goals and how we can achieve them. In this case, we'll just stick to our digital marketing goals because that is our focus for this course, but let's apply them to our example. So, for example, if we break this down, let's start with branding. Rather than just saying we want to have better branding, we could say the following. We want to increase the perception of Custom Comfort being a high quality brand by 10% by the end of Q2. That would mean that we have a measurable goal now as well. Again, by our customer segments and media mentions. All right, we can track all of that through those metrics. Then moving on to engagement, we want to increase our engagement by 35% by the end of Q2 as well. Then we want to increase our sales by 20% by the end of Q2, and we want to increase our leads by an overall 30% by the end of Q2. Right, and now we finally want to increase our general brand awareness by 35% by the end of Q2. All right, so we have very specific goals here, and each one of these concepts that we've mentioned really does follow the SMART approach. I hope you can now start to understand how it all comes together. And what we would usually include in this as well is our channels, so where all of this actually takes place. But we'll be going into that in a couple of lessons that lie ahead of us throughout this module. Just be aware that this is not an entire full strategy that you can just use and go into the market with to apply. This is just simply the start. And the start is where we begin to create our understanding of what strategic marketing is all about. We'll go into some more details to make all of this a lot more refined and learn how to come up with an actual digital strategy along the way that we can actually rely on and use in order to uplift and position our businesses.